Welcome to the 35th episode of the second season of the Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for today's episode. Today's episode is called Lovely Day, in honor of the song by Bill Withers. Here, at the end of the second season of the podcast and my second year in the pulpit at St. Gabriel, this episode is a love letter to the congregation and to you, podcast listeners, and a gesture toward reclaiming faith and defining faith in a way that unifies rather than divides. So we'll begin with our Great World House segment and then our Word of Wisdom, read by Michelle Augustine. We now pause to honor the great world house of which we are a part, lifting up the needs, the hopes, and the voices beyond these doors. Today is Flag Day. The Stars and Stripes were adopted by the Continental Congress on this day in 1777. And I'll be honest, when I read the story of this holiday, it is a history of wars. Every time that we've taken a step toward formalizing Flag Day, it was to rally a nation in crisis. It happened during the Civil War and once during each World War. But here's what I keep coming back to. What if we choose to view the flag not as a banner of war, but as a symbol of covenant? A symbol of the powerful promises we've made one another that are bigger than national identity. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Life is a promise, but it's not just a promise of the freedom to live. It's a promise of duty not to limit the lives of others. Liberty is a promise, but it's not just a promise that you get to have the free exercise of your own energies. It's also a promise of duty not to limit the free exercise of the energies of others. The pursuit of happiness is a promise. But it's not just a promise that you're free to pursue. It's a promise of duty not to hinder the pursuit of happiness for others. If the flag is a promise, then like every promise worth making, it has been both broken and renewed. And the renewing is done by people. It's done by people in small rooms, deliberating, disagreeing, voting, and staying at the table anyway. The congregations that became Unitarian have been governing themselves, gathering, deliberating, and voting since before there was a flag to fly. And Universalist congregations have been doing so for almost that long. And this afternoon in our congregational meeting, we'll do it again. So this Flag Day, I'm inviting us to honor the symbol by doing in our own congregational polity the highest thing that it points toward. That we practice covenant and that we practice democracy. Amen.
We're going to enter a still place within. I'd like you to open your hearts and your minds to receive the voice of wisdom. We welcome a voice of wisdom carried through Mr. Ross Gay, and we'll take a time after these words are spoken to kind of breathe and settle in. Remember, these are the words of Ross Gay. It is common to see public statues in our country, statues carrying guns. Statues of men adorned with guns. Statues of white men adorned with guns. You'll probably notice this in our public squares, often near city halls, near county courthouses like ours, which is an unambiguous assertion of cultural values, lest that slip away. Now, all of which amplifies or magnifies my delight today when passing the Hoagie Carmichael statue on campus Hoagie is leaning over his piano, almost embracing it. Maybe he's working out the chords of Starlight, or maybe Heart and Soul. His hat's kind of tilted back on his head. His outstretched hand is atop the piano, just enough for to hold some flowers, to fit in there. When someone or someones have decided that's just what they should do. So some ones have slid an explosive allium flower, probably pilfered from a spot nearby, and they put it in his hand. The allium is such a fortuitous flower for many reasons, but in this case, kind of looks like a wand or some other magical and pointedly non-martial baton. There was also another flower, don't know the name of it, and it's made of a bunch of little petite, violet, little bell-shaped flowers. And the third flower, unknown to me, is a yellow one. And that made me realize that this was a collaborative effort. And it's endowing Hoagie not only with a wand-centric bouquet, but with a beautifully composed one. Complementary shapes and colors. So seeing this, I was reminded of how often, in fact, we have the impulse to adorn our statues, our public figures, with flowers, sometimes coins or fruit. I suspect that this statue adorning impulse, whether we know it or not on public figures, is evidence, more evidence that our inclination, our nature, is to communicate the beautiful and the fragrant, however we can, to make the world a bouquet or a vase.
From breath to word, from silence to speech, we enter the unfolding in word. Evidence. More evidence that our inclination, our nature, is to communicate the beautiful and the fragrant however we can, to make of the world a bouquet or a vase. We didn't put an extra gun in the statue. Didn't wrap a bandolier of bullets around its neck. That wasn't what the heart of the people saw. They wanted to put an offering of sustenance or beauty. I know we show up to a world every day where it feels like there are a lot of people who don't want the same future that we want. But that might be just a slight failure of imagination on our part. Now, certainly, I would agree that they are not doing things that are doing much to bring that world about. But I think we all know from our own experience that it's easy to convince yourself that a misguided course of action might be the right one when you get all up in your head about things. Or when you get buried in your own feelings about things, especially if those feelings are coming from places of past trauma and difficult experience. So part of that nature, part of that inclination to make the world beautiful is also an inclination to make the world just and fair. In the last year, I had a member of this congregation who thought it was important to remind me that it was possible for me to preach that life is beautiful. I know I spend a lot of time up here talking about the pitfalls and the things that happen that draw us off the narrow path, or that make it hard for us to find or see or appreciate the narrow path between what we might call Pollyanna-ish optimism and soul-destroying pessimism. But I am suggesting to you that the narrow path does lie in an interesting place between those two poles, that there's a kind of grounded pessimism that's just accepting that the world is the way it is, while still seeing the gap between how it is right now and how the yearning, the shared yearning in our breast for it to be better, that there's a gap there. But what I want to preach about this morning is the other side, the side that draws us into a kind of productive optimism that isn't Pollyanna, that is grounded, but that understands what Bill was singing about. And it understands what Ross Gay was writing about when he says that there's no secret cabal of people who have decided to do the flowers. It's just some people acting out of their own impulse, and they stop and they pick a flower. I'm reminded of the idea that I've seen graphically where people put flowers into the muzzles of tanks and guns and use those as a bouquet. What a lovely use. Maybe second best only to plowshares. But if we've got enough to eat, turning them into vases works for me. So I want to honor that idea that I could preach a sermon on beauty, and I got there through this Bill Withers song. Then I look at you, and the world's all right with me. Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be a lovely day. Now, in the past, I've always thought of those lyrics as romantic ones, right? He's got a muse or a partner. But earlier this week, as I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about today, that wasn't how the song landed for me. They landed for me as a love song to this congregation. After a week or sometimes two of news and war and all the corruption and exploitation and extraction that are still rampant in this world, when I start to sense my own despair hovering around the corners of my peripheral vision, I get to come here, and I get to do this, and I get to see all of you. And then I look at you, and the world's all right with me. Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be a lovely day. That's my truth. I get to come here and look at all of you, and we get to sing together and meditate together and reflect together, think together. We get to be together, and that restores me. And I hope that it restores you. Now I couldn't leave this just at feel good. I had to dissect something intellectually. So for those of you who are about to feel disappointed, I'm going there. And for those of you who are relieved, I'm sorry. But I want you to show up as your true selves, and so I have to do my version of that too. So there is a distinction that I want to make. You don't just restore my hope. You restore my faith. And I think that's a distinction worth spending a few minutes on. You see, hope is a future thing. Hope is, I hope it gets better one day. I hope that there's a day out there somewhere that's got less corruption, more wisdom in our leadership, more sensibility in our organization of material and political culture, more space for my grandchildren, more flowers in bloom, all of that. All that stuff that fits inside the big fat Venn diagram of our shared hopes, dreams, and aspirations. But that hopefulness about some future floating out there is not what's renewed for me when I show up here. The thing that's renewed for me is faith. And faith I want to define as a present moment thing. Now, there's a whole bunch of language, and I spend a lot of my time talking about the things that I get in the way of us being able to live that faithfulness, but I don't know that I've told you what I mean by it. So I'm going to try and do that this morning. I'm going to use the Buddhist language because I think it's clearer without getting into the weeds. So the Buddhist language, for me, lands like this. There's the eightfold path. The eightfold path of Buddhism says right view, right way of looking at the world, right intention. Based on like the work of Karen Armstrong, probably that would be intention rooted in love and compassion for other people and for life. Right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration or focus. I know that's a long list. I don't know if any of you noticed this. Life's complicated. Like if there was only like, if I could teach you to do this stuff and you only had to pay attention to like one or two variables, I would do that version. But I think the Buddhists were onto something with the eightfold path, that there's at least kind of 8 critical dimensions going on in this complicated thing that we are, that we have to kind of keep an eye on, because otherwise they're the thing that goes into the red and then suddenly we're into a reactive space instead of a spiritually grounded, fecund space. So this eightfold path is just one way of thinking about that constellation of things that we have to pay attention to. But what does the faith mean? But what do we mean by this faith? The faith is that if we do those things well, those 8 things, if we keep those 8 gauges in our own life in the green zone, those conditions that we hope for and yearn for become possible in our daily lives. Not as a future thing, as a present experienced thing, and as a contagious present experienced thing. That's important. It's contagious. And the contagiousness of showing up in right relation, with right intention, non-harmful speech, non-exploitive ways of sustaining our body and our household and our income. If we get those things tweaked into the green zone, when we show up, people are like, what's going on with Joe? Have you noticed Joe seems different lately? Like something's going on with Joe. I don't know what it is. But it makes me want to emulate it. Like contagion, like leadership is just another word for contagion, folks. Leadership is just another word for a kind of contagion. When a leader figures out how to keep their things in the green, then people are like, what's going on with that? I think I might like to have some of that mojo, whatever it is. Any Austin Powers fans in the room? Yeah. I've got to get his mojo. We've got to find the mojo. This is the mojo. I'm trying to tell you about the mojo. So I spend a lot of time talking about the things that distract us from these 8 aspects of this path. But I think the other thing I spent a lot of time doing in the last 2.5 years that we've been together is trying to make my belief, my faith, contagious to you, that when we do those things, the better world that we all dream of and despair of starts to become more and more possible. But not as hope, not as delayed gratification, as lived experience, as lived contagious experience that's asking you to join the leadership in this broader culture of leading in this way that other people go, how are they so calm when things are crazy over there? How is it that when I'm in their presence, I feel more grounded and I can feel both my joy and my sorrow more deeply without feeling afraid and unsafe? That's weird. I'm used to feeling unsettled. Even Brené Brown writes about it. She writes about foreboding joy. Every time something good happens in my life, I'm just waiting for that other shoe to drop. Oh, okay. Yep, reality came back. Shoo! I was worried. I was worried we were on the way to the kingdom here on earth, that all my fantasies were going to come true, but luckily something bad happened to dissuade me from thinking that that was really possible. Nope, it's still a SH show out there, and I'll try not to finish that so I don't have to check the box on the podcast later that says, use profanity during service. So there are a couple strands to that. Last week we talked about one during the flower communion, which is this belief that we individually are not enough, right? So we kind of attacked that, like, you are both enough and worthy. And then there's the weird next one that goes along in the chain. You are enough and worthy, and while you are special, you're not that special. You know, you are. You're like a super unique snowflake, right? And every snowflake is unique. True. And yet they're all made of a crystalline structure that's relatively similar. And it ends up the similarity in this room is over 99%. The genetic variation among humans is less than 0.5%. So you are 99.9% your brother's keeper. You are 99.9% each other. Now we got this weird stuff that happens, right? Like we live different life courses and experiences and we show up very differently. We talked last week about how like this whole tabula rasa idea was a bunch of bunk. Like if you've ever raised children, you know that like they didn't come out like blank slates ready for your will to be impressed upon them. They were like, I've got my own ideas, thank you. And some of us were very insistent, like, but I had my ideas first. And they're like, yeah, you did. But I don't care, I'm still gonna do my own thing. Now, some of them decided that when they were 6, and some of them waited till they were 56 to be like, nope, I've had enough. I'm done being who you want me to be. It's time for me to be who I need to be, right? So, some of them, with their early compliance, fooled us into thinking that they were on with the ride, this tabula rasa ride. But eventually they show up, and they're like, no, I know you have your own ideas, but yeah, me too. So, special but not that special. Why am I bringing this up? So, you are worthy and enough, and so is everybody else. Oh. Wait, do you mean everybody? I've got a list in my head of names who I'd really like to exclude from the everybody that is worthy that you've just mentioned. Justifiably for very, very bad behavior. So I talk a lot about how that need and desire to sit in judgment is one of the things that blocks us from the eightfold path. Look, we can't make those other people who are currently stuck in bad behavior, we can't make them stop. Like, if I had my Harry Potter wand and knew the spell, I would already have done it. But we can change how we show up to the harm that they cause. We can change how we organize ourselves and respond to that, and with what kind of energy. And in our response might be the healing that the universe is yearning for along with us. And that's the confidence that I feel when I come into this pulpit. And we unpack together how to avoid the pitfalls of some life that resembles this eightfold path, and to reclaim the ability of showing up well and human and whole. We're not showing up to our healing because we're selfish. This is the other thing I preach about a lot, and I'm just going to try and say a kernelized version of it quickly. I didn't show up to my own healing in my own life because I was like, oh, I need to be the Buddha or I need to be enlightened. I was going through a crisis with my adopted son who I would die for. And I realized that I was unwittingly handing him the damage from my life because it was stuff I had walked away from. The traumas from my early life were going to get handed down to him unless I stood up. That was where my motivation came from. I wasn't willing to do all that hard work just for me. But when I realized that there is a path, and I'm not going to misuse the quote because Chris Verdane is here and he's going to bust me again for misusing the Robert Frost quote. I'm saying that with love. That was fun. That was a fun moment last week. No, but I don't want to misuse the metaphor because I do. It annoys me too when I know better and people do it. So, but I did realize, I came to a very stark realization that when our own trauma triggers show up in our life, whatever they are, whatever shape they are, whatever season or trauma they come from, whether it's a mental thing and a mental block because you have this view of the world, or it's something that's happened emotionally, or it's like your body literally does the fight or flight or freeze thing, like whatever it is, when that moment comes up for you in your life, if your reaction to it is, oh, I do not want to deal with that, can I just have a strategy that keeps me away from that trigger? You are going to inevitably take that thing out on the people you love most. There's no berth wide enough to give that thing in your life. You have to walk into that, oh man, here's another one. Here's another thing in my life that's not healed yet, and it just came up for me this day, this week, this hour, this minute. And when it shows up, you walk into it and say, I'm going to experience this, and I'm going to open my heart and my mind and myself to it, and I'm going to find a healing path through that thing, not because I'm worth it in some crazy egocentric way, but because, you know what? Y'all don't deserve for me to pass that on to you. We don't do healing for us out of selfishness. We do healing because it's the flip side of that responsibility I was talking about. When I went through life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I said, yes, I want you to experience liberty. And I need you to promise not to get in other people's way so that they can experience liberty. Leaving your traumas unhealed makes it not possible for you to steward other people's stuff. You can't get out of other people's way when you are a farm of trauma triggers. And it is contestable and contest worthy. But I think at this phase in our evolution, most of us are still carrying a lot of that around. I discover new stuff in myself on a weekly, monthly basis. Some new trigger will come up for me and I'll be like, oh man, I really thought I had that whole room cleaned out. And then I found another box. Oh, that's not good stuff in that box. That's hard stuff in that box. Can I just close the box up and put it back in the closet? But it's just like a real box. For those of you at a certain point in your life, you might be thinking thoughts like this. I'm thinking thoughts like this because of what's happened this week. Sure. Get out your double strength tape, tape the box up nice and tight. Don't label it. Sneak it in the bottom of the closet. And it can stay there until you die. Who's unpacking it? Whoever you bequeathed it to. And you're gone, you don't get to pick anymore. You are gone, but somebody's got to come open that box of SH and unpack it after you're gone because you decided you didn't want to deal with it. And that is a metaphor for what I'm talking about. You decided you didn't mess with that box, you shove it in the closet, you conveniently forgot about it, and you just bequeathed it. Faith for me is faith that we don't have to make that choice. There's a different choice we make. And when we make it, we get better. And I don't mean like just the individual you who made the choice about, you know what? I don't want to mess with this box. I wish it didn't exist, but it does exist. It's part of my reality. I'm going to unpack it and distribute it, do a cleansing ceremony, whatever I need to do. And I'm going to deal with that box so I don't bequeath it. Because it's not going to just disappear magically in the bottom of the closet. It's not going away of its own. There's some magical disapparition. It's going to be there until somebody deals with it, and it's going to be you or it's going to be some future generation that you're leaving it to. But I actually have faith that this work is possible. And perhaps foolishly, I hope not, but there are days when I doubt. I sometimes think that standing up here and talking to you like this might somehow move the needle of possibility or probability in your own life that the next time you run across a box full of SH in your life, you decide to open it. Here's what I'll say. I think it matters. I think when you make the choice to open the box and deal with the contents, it makes your relationships better with other people. It makes you less afraid to show up in a vulnerable way when somebody you know has just opened their box and they're in a hard place. Because you're not like, you should not open that. Just put tape on that thing and put it back in the closet. Can't we go back to pretending like everything's fine? And I know that this is partly personal for me. I grew up with one half of my family who absolutely played the Ozzie and Harriet everything's fine game. So I had to spend 40 years figuring out the shape of all the stuff they refused to talk about. Because it wasn't fine. And it didn't take a magician, just a child, to notice that everything wasn't fine. But they had very full closets with lots of tape and wrappings to keep everything very sealed up. And I think they were pretty sure that if you left the stuff in the closet long enough, Star Trek technology would show up and that stuff would eventually get teleported out of the closet to some other magical space where the SH didn't exist anymore. But it's not. It was bequeathed from one generation to the next. The Hindus and others talk about samsara, right? This cycle, the cycle. We can get out of the cycle of suffering if we start showing up to our work. That's my faith. I mean, that's the faith that when I look at all of you and I ask, what is it we're trying to do here together? Like, I can't make the world out there suck less than it does right now. There's some bad stuff going on, bona fide bad stuff. And I am not of the we should sit quietly and it'll pass either. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is that I believe that you and we together can find a space of mature wisdom and equanimity with which we face all that stuff. And that means that even as things continue to be broken out there, we can experience wholeness in our lives that is leadership, that is an infectious agent inviting others to see what it looks like when we show up for one another and treat each other with respect and share each other's struggles to live in a way that's aligned with our own values. That if we do that, that kingdom of God thing that's been so misinterpreted and misprojected, that it's actually really possible right here. Like right here. Right here when our left foot is planted on our one value and our right foot is planted on our other value. And the mysterious calling of this life is held in our hands like a lever. And all of us are gathered here together. There's a famous quote, a small committed group of people can change the world. In fact, are the only thing that ever has. People who knew what...
Margaret Mead.
Thank you, Margaret Mead. People who had figured out what their values were. They had a place to stand. At Archimedes, place to stand in a lever to move the universe. Margaret Mead, showing us what it means. They figured out what their values were. They had a place to stand. They had a lever in their hands that was their calling in this life, the things that they were uniquely suited to do, the gifts that they brought to bear. And together we put all those levers on the boulder and we can move it. But it's not just about the boulder. When you are in that place of standing on your values with your own life's purpose in your hands, you get to experience what I experience every Sunday when I'm up here, which is that this makes the world all right. Like, there's joy in it. There is joy in it. It's not just how shitty things are. Oh, I did it. Now I got to mark the podcast. I used the SH thing too many times. I knew I was going to get too close to the cliff too many times. You're going to put a foot over. Just how that goes. I could cut it out, but I know that faith is a dirty word for some of y'all. I know that it's been weaponized against you in other contexts, some of you. But I think that's every weaponization of the term mistakes it for some other kind of hope, some other kind of thing that's happening in the future. And our ability to reclaim it and own it and live it is about not living in the future. It's about living in the present with our feet planted in our values right now. And if my invitations and inveigling help you to get to that place in your life, then we can stand together and we can experience the deep community that we long for. And then what's true for me, I hope will become true for you. Then I look at you, and the world's all right with me. Just one look at you, and I know it's gonna be a lovely day. Amen. Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help others find it by liking and subscribing. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The Pulpiteer podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. Our live recording tech crew is Frank Sanders, Rob Berthold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andrea McDaniel. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn. As I said, this is the final episode of season 2, so we'll see you in July when we'll start a brand new season of The Pulpiteer.